Greetings, everyone. My name is Wendy Osborne, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this IAVI webinar. This is the first in a short series of 3 webinars called Leadership for Volunteering, Reflecting on the COVID-19 Experience. And it's looking at briefing papers that were provided as part of an IAVI research regarding the experience and response of leadership for volunteering organizations during the pandemic. This research was published in 2021, and the briefing papers that accompany the webinars both reflect on evidence gathered from the research project and inform future volunteering questions and practice. The first topic that we're looking at as part of this series is volunteering and disaster preparedness, exploring the role of and the relationship between the not-for-profit and corporate sectors. And we're delighted today to have our moderator, Andrea, and indeed a range of very fine presenters from across the world. Andy is founder and executive director of Alliance for Impact. He has more than 25 years of innovative and collaborative experience of humanitarian emergencies, global risks, sustainable development, and armed conflict. He now runs organizations that promote and support multi-sector partnerships for a better world and provide communication support to non-profit organizations. I'm delighted that Andy has been able to join us as moderator today, and I know his experience will help keep us on track, and I'm sure you're going to have a very enjoyable and informative session. So thank you, and Andy, it's over to you.
Thank you, Wendy. It's a real pleasure to be invited by IAVI to moderate this session today. I'll introduce the speakers in detail just before they speak, but you can be reassured we've got some great people with us today. The front pages of newspapers and some of the web-based news features are still dominated by disasters and crises like the COVID pandemic and what's going on in Ukraine, the climate crisis. But we need to also spare a thought for those other humanitarian crises, the ones that don't even make the back pages now. Ethiopia, Syria, Yemen, there's floods in Bangladesh, there's Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The United Nations estimates that there are around almost 300 million people in need in 63 countries. And that, according to the UN, needs an equivalent of about $41 billion just in the remainder of 2022 to provide them with what they need. And every year, these numbers go up. And the gap between the amount needed and the amount provided also goes up. Today, you'll hear about different solutions, more than just giving money. You'll hear about the role of non-profits and companies in responding to disasters and crises themselves and the relationships between those kinds of organizations. You'll hear about their planning to deliver effective disaster response, their leadership and their partnerships. More precisely, you'll hear about volunteers, and particularly important to my organization right now is about the local community involvement. But what have our speakers learned from their own experience, especially during the COVID pandemic all around the world? And how will that influence volunteer involvement in the future? As you hear each of them speak, please feel free to post your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And we'll try to get to as many of those questions as possible after all the presenters have spoken. So please be patient, but keep those questions coming in. The first person who'll be speaking is Alice Turner. Alice is the manager for social impact at the UPS Foundation. She's responsible for supporting the UPS Health and Humanitarian Relief Program, its Global Forestry Initiative, and Women Exporters Program. Alice also oversees the UPS Foundation's Global Forestry Initiative to plant 50 million trees by 2030. She also has a passion for community and has worked with multiple grassroots NGOs before joining UPS. Alice coordinates air, ocean, and ground shipments across UPS's global transportation network to bring life-sustaining supplies to disaster survivors and refugee aid agencies. So Alice, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andy. My presentation, I'm going to give you an insight to how a global transportation company runs their disaster relief program. I'm calling my presentation The Logistics of Caring, because even though we're out there volunteering, helping others, and making an impact, the best disaster plan is really to have a disaster plan so that you can tell people what you're doing and what you can't do. A strategic approach really helps you make the impact. Let's see. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the UPS Foundation, and then I'll go into our disaster program. So we're delivering help around the world through these focus areas. And I want to explain all the focus areas before I get to the humanitarian relief one, because they're intertwined, and it will help you understand more about our disaster relief program. So Andy said 50 million trees by 2030. That is one of our goals behind the plan of protection. And we're also planting trees in different disaster areas using volunteers. Local community engagement, we're mobilizing volunteers. One of the biggest parts of this particular program is providing funding across the globe to all of our region and districts so that our local UPS employees have the ability to provide funding where it's needed most in their community. Equity and economic empowerment, removing systemic barriers and creating opportunities. So although they're very different focus areas, all of them help in health and humanitarian relief. And I'm going to kind of go through this. So first, doing a deep dive into the humanitarian relief program. It is important for your disaster relief, your health and humanitarian program, to outline the who, what, when, where, and how, and to outline what you want to do with your program. What are your goals? What are your expected impacts? I'm going to start with the what, because at the UPS Foundation, we think it's very important to invest in all phases of disasters. Disaster preparedness and mitigation, working with businesses, working with individuals to make sure that they have the tools and the knowledge and the items in place so that when they are hit by a disaster, they know how to recover from it quickly. There's a statistic, a very small portion of small businesses actually recover from disasters after they're hit. So one of the things we want to make sure is that our small businesses are prepared and they can thrive after a disaster. Response and recovery, yes, we want to be there after each disaster hits. We want to show up, we want to show that UPS is there. So the long-term recovery is, we want to make sure we're in all phases of disaster. Preparedness, preparing our businesses so that they can recover. The one thing that UPS, one of our specialties is our health system strengthening pillar, our phase of disaster. We want to make sure that the supply chain of the organizations that we help are prepared to respond to the disasters. We want to make sure that the cold chain is in place for different vaccines. We want to make sure that we have ability to get to the health centers that roads cannot get to. So UPS has a very unique positioning there where we play to our strengths of the business to make sure that that phase is covered. I'm going to give you a couple of the pillars here now for where our disaster report stands on. I'm going to start in the corner with our in-kind support. So last year we gave over $9 million for our partner agencies. And I say yes, our partner agencies, because we have to be very strategic in who we choose to ship for. As a global transportation company, we're asked many times a day to ship items for those in needs, because there are great needs all over the world. But having defined partners and programs to provide an outlet to help explain to people what your streamlined approach is to making an impact. Innovation. This drone that you see here delivers blood and medical devices to health centers across Africa and hard to reach places. And it's just one example of an innovation project where we used our employees' ideas to help save lives. This drone is now delivering COVID-19 vaccines to hard to reach places in Africa. Senior engagement. So we've talked to our senior leaders. We know what they're passionate about, and we find the board that best aligns to that passion. We know this allows them to see an organization from the inside out. It helps them identify where they have items that UPS could best support them with. And then making that connection on the most senior level helps promote and elevate the partnership. This is our senior leader, Laura Lane, in Dubai on a UNHCR mission. Experts on missions. We have some of the best logisticians at UPS. And so when the Experts on Mission program is where we take UPS employees who have a very specific expertise in logistics, transportation, warehousing, really any area that one of our strategic partners need help in. We will talk to the partners. They will identify a bottleneck or a place where they need help. And we can go into our organization to find the person who best fits that. An example is, I'm gonna go with UNHCR. UPS uses their trucks for 25 plus years. We have a very stringent truck detailing program. And so UNHCR asked us how we do it. And so we were able to put a person who operates the day-to-day programs of a truck into the UNHCR facilities to help them understand more about their how to care best for their trucks to make them last longer. Sector collaboration. UPS, this is a picture of the logistics emergency team. The logistics emergency team is a group that is made up of different logistics organizations. DP World, Maersk, Agility, and UPS all work together during times of disasters. We train together when it is non-disaster time so that we understand how to work together, and we train with the World Food Program. This allows us to deploy our people with the other logistic companies to do the transportation to get relief supplies into disaster zones when the supply chain is broken. We know by working together as a team, we can we can complete the whole supply chain from A to Z. And disaster and volunteers. So that's the thing we're here to talk about, is volunteering in disasters. And I am going to show you a couple of our favorite volunteer activities with disasters. So pick and pack operations are great. You can do with them multiple NGOs. And the great thing about pick and pack is you can do them anywhere in the world to provide a relief to any disaster. And when you do these, you work with organizations who already have a plan for the items that you are picking and packing. For a skilled volunteerism, I have a UPSer here who is doing a training on a COVID-19 freezer to the Ministry of Health. UPS is UNICEF's official training partner for the cold chain operation of the COVID-19 vaccine. And although we do it for more developed countries, for underdeveloped countries, we do it for free. And we use our skilled volunteer to do it. Group volunteer projects. So the picture in the top right-hand corner is a program called Eduardo. UPS has a team of data scientists that got together with agility data scientists, and they aggregated flight data from lots of different cargo and passenger planes, which allows nonprofit organizations who are trying to ship items to a disaster zone the ability to see what is available to them. The other three that I want to pick out or show is distribution centers. During disaster, there are distribution centers everywhere. We want to make sure that our brand shows up so that you are showing UPS showed up to the area. And local collection drives. Collection drives for disasters are only good when they are local. You do not want to collect items for a disaster that is in multiple countries over without a shipping plan. The only reason that this is a disaster local collection drive for Poland, it was done in Poland and distributed in Poland. When collection drives happen in the US to ship overseas, a lot of time, all you're doing is clogging supply chains and making it harder for organizations to receive the really life-sustaining relief material that they need. So when people call and they want to know, if your employees are calling and they want to volunteer, do not please decide to do a collection drive to ship overseas. What you should do is a blood drive. Blood is always needed in disasters. All employees can do it. It is an easy thing that you can offer to benefit. You can offer benefits for employees to donate. And it is the number one most needed item in disasters.
Alice, can I ask you to just make your one last point before we move on to the next speaker, please?
Andy, that is my last point. Please do not do collection drives. We do the disaster people do. Our disaster relief organizations overseas do not need people from the US to send over some of the cans that they have in the back of their areas. If you're looking for a disaster relief volunteer project, use skilled volunteers, use the expertise that you have within your organization or within your nonprofit to provide expertise.
Wonderful.
Nonprofit.
Great, thank you very much, Alice. That was a loud and clear, hard-hitting home message at the very end. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Kuule Yona. Kuule is the Executive Director at Yes Empowerment Services in Uganda. He has worked as the Community Development Field Supervisor at the Young and Powerful Initiative, and as the Finance and Administrator at the Agape of Hope Female Youth Development Association. Kuule is highly experienced at mobilizing and publicizing volunteer work, at creating partnerships and enhancing volunteering strategies, leadership and governance. For the last 6 years, he's been at the forefront of disaster response and preparedness preparedness, especially during the floods and landslides around Mountain Rwenzori in Uganda. Kuule, over to you. Looks like we might have to come back to Kuule. I think what we might do instead is shift to the next speaker on our list, which is, and we'll come back to Kuule. The next speaker is Shrirang Dhavale. He's the General Manager, Community Services Administration and Accounts at Tata Sustainability Group. Shrirang's responsibilities include disaster response and social development, program management, planning, deployment, and impact assessment, as well as driving the business and human rights agenda at the Tata Group. He has experience of working on human rights, bringing in a community perspective in corporate processes, as well as CSR strategy development. He's worked for over 11 years with ActionAid International, one of my old organizations, in Orissa, Rajasthan, and other places around India, and on disaster response, including tsunami, earthquakes, floods, and droughts in Rajasthan. Shrirang, floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Andy, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. We've seen a period of historic sorrow, and after that, we all are meeting. So I hope the bad times are behind us, and we are moving towards something that is more beautiful for us. I represent the group of Tatas, and very quickly, Tata is a big global enterprise housed, located in India, but we operate out of all the 6 continents, and you can see the numbers for yourself on the screen. But what is most interesting is that 66% of the Tata Group, the equity share capital of the Tata Sons, which is the holding company of Tata Group, that is with philanthropic trusts. So about 1,000 crores, which turns out to be about $800 million, that they are located in trusts, and they do all sorts of philanthropic activities. I don't belong to trusts. I belong to the company side, and we have what they call as salt to software conglomerate. So we have about 100 odd companies. 28 of them are listed, and we are in 10 business verticals. The Tata Group is different in a way. You can see on the screen what our founder spoke before about 150 years, and he said that the community is not just another stakeholder in business, but in fact is very purpose of our existence. So you can see the connect from this kind of philosophy to 66% shareholding given to philanthropic trusts. Today's topic is about volunteering, and I'm happy to share with you that Tata Group has elaborate corporate volunteering program. It's called Tata Engage. We have a small volunteering design for the initiators, which is called Tata Volunteering Week, which happens twice in a year. The Pro Engage design is for professional engagement, just as Alice shared that we have in 800,000 people, we have all sorts of skills that are available, which are relevant to social development space. So colleagues from finance, from human resources, from strategy, from IT, go down to not-for-profits and offer their skills to strengthen the volunteering network. And the third part is disaster response, and we are going to talk about it in detail. All these three formats are available for our own employees, our own employees' families, and also ex-Tata colleagues. You can imagine that we have a history of 150 years, and today, if we are 800,000 people, we have a large retiree population as well. Delighted to tell you that the philosophy that the founder spoke about is indeed part of our culture, and for the past 7 years, we've been clocking over 1 million volunteering hours. On the right side of screen, what you see is a picture which is very dear to my heart, where volunteers worked after Typhoon Fani, which was on the eastern coast of India, and we are going to talk about this again later. But 1.2 million volunteering hours is what we clocked in FY21. If we look at overall COVID pandemic, and many of us were working from home, so we tweaked the theme of Tata Volunteering Week, which is the initiators format for volunteering at the Tata Group. And we said work from heart. And you can imagine the world was at a standstill. Everyone was worried about oneself, about our own families, about our own neighbors. And in that context, also because of this tweaking of the format, many companies adopted the virtual route to reach out to communities. So you can see again a company like Tata Projects, Tata TCS, they adopted the virtual platform to reach out to kids, teaching them mathematics, teaching them science, and so on. We also, apart from adopting the phygital mode per se, we also came out with a app which democratized, which gave every Tata colleague that power to host certain activity and other colleagues to come in. I'm a good time to remember that we are not one company. We are a group. We are a conglomerate of 100 odd companies, and you have your connection with your own company, but the power of app allowed you to go and work with other Tata colleagues who may be working in other sector, in other company, and so on. The case studies, what I referred to, Tata Consultancy Services, which is one of the biggest software IT companies. They recognize the challenge of this pandemic and its impact on schools, and they came out with pre-existing STEM modules. There are other companies like Tata Communications, which recorded 1,000 inspirational stories and then gave it to the not-for-profits to run it. What may be interesting for all of you, and there are other case studies which you can see on the screen, but what is interesting is on the right side, where a company from Tata Group actually helped do a needs assessment study for the migrants. I don't know if you've read stories from India. There was large number of population which was stuck in cities. Their families were in source areas, and they were stuck here. They had come here for work and sending the money back to their families, which may be 500, 700 kilometers away. And all of them were stuck because this decision of lockdown was taken in a way in emergency context. So the decision was taken, everyone was stuck, and then because rail network, road networks were all closed, the issue of migrant laborers was becoming a big issue. And one of our company and their volunteers worked with a reputed social science institute to carry out needs assessment, and which then fed into policy making. Coming down to the Tata Group's disaster response, the Tata Sustainability Group is mandated to build capability on disaster response and actually coordinate the response in case of floods, cyclones, etc. Our definition also allows us to get into man-made, human-made disasters. And if we trace back the history of Tata Group, the Tata volunteers also worked with refugee colonies post our partition with Pakistan. After the THG's formation, we've dealt with 13 such big natural disasters, and we've touched about 8.2 lakh individuals. So few differentiators. One is that individually companies don't operate in case of disaster. We come together and there's some method to madness about how Tata Group will intervene in case of disasters. The second one is we don't do disaster response volunteering for brand building. So I remember a very interesting conversation with one of our one of the officials in Nepal post the Nepal earthquake, where that person was telling me that everyone is working in and around Kathmandu, where the world eye was there and world media was capturing the images there. But Tata Group chose to work in higher mountains on the Tibet border. Third is, we don't believe in just signing of checks. Our volunteers go down and work with not-profits during the disaster time. It's not just companies' profit that is contributing to the disaster response case, but individuals, or most of the employees of the Tata Group actually contribute 1 day's salary for all major disasters. I spoke about not writing the check. We have created a cadre of dedicated volunteers, and these volunteers do not come from social development space. They are seniors working in strategy, finance, you name the function, and we have a senior who has raised the hand and has signed up for disaster response duty. We take our training very seriously. So all these seniors are trained in procurement during humanitarian crisis and trained in leading the Tata response, and they are deployed. Leverage. And finally, we have a lot of companies which are in relevant sectors. So if there is a cyclone, there's an earthquake, we have a company in the infrastructure space which comes on board. So with volunteers comes the professional skills of that company which come handy during the disasters. All this, there are set of values which companies and volunteers take lot of trouble in translating in action. So all my assessments are to check whether those values were translated in action when we were deploying the humanitarian response. Andy, and this is my last slide. I leave it to you, leave you with this one slide. Vistara, which is our Tata's partnership with Singapore Airlines. They were in trouble. You can imagine 1.5 years, there was no aviation, hardly any aviation. So company was in dark red, salaries were cut and so on and so forth. But looking at the migrant crisis, looking at what is happening to the disadvantaged communities because of lockdown and stopping of this livelihood option, I'm very happy to share with you that Tata Vistara, which is our brand name for the Singapore Airlines joint venture, their volunteers went down, identified the needy, disadvantaged communities, and then carried out a relief distribution that I have great pride in the way they actually translated our values in action. For signing off, I think Wonderful. All of you are doing great work. And I hope that next disaster, and how much soever we hope that there won't be another disaster because of climate change. We all know that disasters are coming; they are more severe. But as human beings with values, my only appeal to you is to make that difference and believe that tomorrow will be a better day because of how much soever smaller action that you think you are taking. I thank Andy for giving me time and thank Ayave for for setting this platform up. Thank you so
Great.
very much.
Thank you, Shrirang. That's a good message to end on. That's a very good call to action. Wonderful. And we'll go back to Kuule Yona in Uganda. Kuule, if you could turn on your video, and then we'll hand over directly to you. Thank you. Okay, the floor's yours.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be part of this presentation. Once again, I'm Kuule Yona, and I'm a director of ESC Empowerment Services. I'm here to present about disaster preparedness, and more especially for us in Uganda, how we handle it and the way we are doing it in Uganda. In Uganda, it has been quite different, and as you know, in Africa, the way we handle disaster risk management could be different to the way you handle in your different countries. So here we are going to look at how we are coming at to disaster risk preparedness, and sometimes with the reduction, how we handle the reduction. I have started here with a brief background about what really happens in Uganda. It was 2020 when we had a lot of disasters in Uganda, and the Ministry of the Prime Minister went ahead to give out statistics and showed that over 65,250 people were displaced by floods. And in this period of COVID-19, we were affected with real floods around Uganda. Look at Bududa, it is a district in northern Uganda. You look at western Uganda, both Kasese and individual districts. All of these districts have been affected with the disasters. And if you look there, that was the floods in the corner. You look at how buildings, how people's property were destroyed, and how in the next slide you look at how we have been engaged in that. And in this, the government has created many around 6 of them were camps where these people displaced with the disasters have been allocated to. Next slide. Yes, if you that was the Muhocha camp I was talking about, and that woman you see there is the chairperson of the camp. If you look at the life in the Muhocha camp, and this is the biggest camp in Uganda that hosts many people who are displaced by floods. And if you look at this is much disappointing. You look at life in the camp and how people are affected. Thank you. Next. Yes, here is our contribution as ESC Empowerment Services. It has really been amazing to engage our volunteers in coming up with innovations, the models of how we support and how we end disaster preparedness in our country. ESC Empowerment Services has given out, we have come out with different models of supporting, of coming up with ways how we can end this. At first, we have given a response. And in our response, we have given food relief. And if you look at the food relief, we identified the most vulnerable people in the camp. Yes, we gauge there are people who have been there, but the life could be different. The way they are affected is totally different. So we have given out food relief. And if you look at our food relief, we have given out to the maize, the soap, and the cassava flour that supports their feeding. And then we have also given out some clothes. Reusable sanitary pads, beddings to these local people. And sometimes we have engaged our volunteers to train the adolescents, the young adolescents, in making reusable sanitary pads so that they can be able to support themselves in different camps and the way they are doing their things. If you look at the photo in the corner, it shows the elderly women. We supported them with the beddings, and everyone was very happy to receive this. If you look at the next, this man was receiving the food relief, and that's how we are doing it. At first, we have come up with the response itself. Thank you. Next slide. Yes, if you look at the way we have done it, and we have also come up with another innovation, because in Africa it is all about how people knows what to do at the rightful time, and what next in the, let me say, at the rightful time of doing it. So we have come up with forming committees in parishes that were affected by the disasters in the wards. Other people may call them the wards, and we give them the knowledge to make sure they come up as different people. They come up with the knowledge of supporting the community on how to handle disasters. And two is all about engaging now the youth, recruiting the youth to become frontline volunteers. And in these youth, they are equipped with different skills, I would say. We have engineers, we have those ones in environment, we have medics, we have, so all these volunteers helps us to make sure the community is well engaged and the community is well informed of what to be done and what they ought to do at a particular time. If you look at the photo there, this was our training of youth, engaging them in how best they can do with the prevention, the preparedness, and how they can do much with the response in their communities that are affected with the disasters. So we engage at grassroots level, at community level. We make sure we have our frontline volunteers who can be able to help in coming up with models, sensitize the community, and come up with the different skills in advocating for this. So we have training, we have trained these volunteers. After recruiting them, we train them, and then we adopt them in the disaster management committees in their different communities where they come from, and this has supported so much. Then the other thing we have come up with is engaging the stakeholders themselves, the opinion leaders on prevention and preparedness response. And these opinion leaders will have engaged even religious leaders themselves, local council leaders, the councillors. So they are coming up with different models, and we make sure we handle disaster preparedness as a team, as people who are devoted to work for the community. So we have also had another program of tree planting. You know, the most problem in Africa is the poor methods of farming. People tend to encroach on the land of near the rivers. So the river banks always burst the rivers always burst their banks. And you find this becoming a problem. It creates floods, landslides, and whatever. So in our innovation, we have come up with planting trees. And these trees we plant acacias, we plant, we'll make sure we plant the bamboo trees along the rivers, and as a strategy of preventing these landslides and floods in the region. Next slide. Yes, here is our partnership. How best we have involved, we have involved others in making sure we work as a team and end the disaster. So at first, as I had earlier on said, engaging the local leaders themselves. These local leaders, our administrative structure is basing on LOC1s, LOC2s, LOC3s, up to LOC5s. So in every district where we go in, is make sure these local leaders, opinion leaders, and religious leaders are much involved into our work. And this helps the community itself to feel the heart, to feel the urge of working for themselves in their communities. So second is working closely with the governments. In every area we have been going to, is the government local leaders also getting involved, from the local to the central. you find all of them are getting involved. We start from the RDCs, we start from the local, the LOC ones, and up to the national level. So you find it is a chain of working. It is a chain of what we do. We look at how best we can handle it locally, then at a central level, and in different offices at national level. So also partnering with other organizations who work in the same. We have different organizations that works in the same. I will look at the Save the Children. They have been working. We have been working closely with them. We look at the Red Cross itself, or getting involved into our work and engaging them to work as a team, as civil society organizations. Then we aim at how best can we improve volunteering in our rural communities in different levels where we work from. And the other thing is engaging the community structures of the government. Government itself has structures in Uganda. I will talk about the village health team. This is a structure of the government based at village level. And the parasocial workers, they are also based at village level. So engaging these structures of the government, incorporating them into our work, to work as volunteers in their communities, gives a government pride to also engage in different activities. So engaging the corporate companies, the companies themselves, business, like the project I was talking about of giving, supporting the elderly. It was supported by we worked in partnership with Radio Ngea Radio. So Ngea Radio, we had an announcement, and people would give in freely, and these communities would receive support because of publicizing and coming up with the strategies at the Ngea Radio. So this has been something we work into collaboration with the media, people giving freely in our country because of the support, the little support we have. So we mobilize the local resources. Next slide. Yes, we have learned a number of lessons. If you look at the building the capacity of leaders, so we are looking at in the future, there will be many volunteers getting in developing strategies that will work better for their own communities because they are already trained, they are incorporated in volunteer work, and they are also feeling part of working for their community. So that's how we have learned, and in the future, we look at how best the volunteers will increase because of increasing their capacity. So the other thing is...
Kuule, can I ask you just to wrap up in 30 seconds, please?
Oh, thank you. So the other thing is also by our work of incorporating these companies, we have seen support because even business people have seen them. Our volunteers were working all over the streets to collect the materials to take it back to the community which is affected. So they are easily giving in because they are involved in the initial planning of our projects. So even trying to plant trees, creating awareness about a disaster, we are seeing that we're having a community that is well sensitized, a community that is well prepared for disaster preparedness. So the government itself, we look at it, they will be happy to help us because they are involved in our initial planning. Next.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kuule. Really appreciate it. Really good presentation. Thank you. Lots there to learn from as well. Our last but not least speaker is Helena Krajewska. Helena is a spokesperson at the Polish Humanitarian Action, a well-known Polish NGO providing humanitarian aid to people affected by conflicts and disasters. Helena has worked for PAH since 2020, and before that, she was with the Polish think tank, the Civil Development Forum, and the Union for the Mediterranean, a regional organization coordinating development aid around the region. Helena has also picked up experience at the European Commission, the Central American Parliament in Guatemala, and the Polish Embassy in Peru. Helena, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say that I'm very impressed with the presentations that I've heard. And I think this is a learning opportunity for us as an organization, for me as well. So I'm very thankful for the presentations. I hope you can hear me all right. And please, can you switch the slide to the second slide? Yes, thank you. So I'm a spokesperson for the Polish Humanitarian Action, and it's a Polish and international NGO that was established in 1992 for the purpose of the Sarajevo humanitarian convoys during the Bosnian War. We started with the convoys, but then we transformed into a proper professional humanitarian organization that doesn't actually organize anymore that much of the humanitarian convoys, but rather long-term aid and cooperation. We are nevertheless the biggest and oldest humanitarian organization in Poland. Currently, we are employing more than 200 employees. Mostly it's local employees from the places we are working in. So South Sudan, Somalia, Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, Kenya, and Ukraine. We are actually very devoted to the idea of employing locally and giving the opportunities to the people of the countries where we are working in, especially that those people really know well the context, the history, the language, and even the terrain, the field where we're working in. So this is very important for us. Can you switch the slide? And so, as I mentioned, our scope of activities is very broad because we do provide rapid humanitarian aid, like in very sudden crisis, for example, as with the earthquake in Haiti, or the switch of power in Afghanistan, or to the refugee camps in Greece during the COVID-19 pandemic. That was a very sudden situation, as well as after the huge explosion in Beirut port. In Lebanon, and most recently on the Polish border with Belarus and with Ukraine. It's a very interesting moment to be a humanitarian in Poland, of course. We are nevertheless providing aid as a long-term humanitarian aid programs, so projects that last at least 6 months, usually 2 or 3 years. But also we are very devoted to the idea of developmental aid. So we, in cooperation with local NGOs, local institutions, local governments, so we can engage the local actors and learn from them and cooperate together. So for that, we really cherish the idea of permanent missions and programs that last for a long time, because that allows you to engage in terrain, in the field. Whereas the rapid humanitarian aid can, for example, last only for a couple of months or weeks or a year top, and then you don't stay in the country usually. So the next slide. Our activities are very broad because we go from food security to shelter to water, hygiene and sanitary. That is our, like, the most important things we do that we are very good at, but also to health. For example, in Yemen, we are providing health support to the health centers and hospitals, as well as some more developmental aid, which is vocational training, which is education, which is, for example, enhancing the disaster risk reduction along with local communities, but also, for example, something that is a humanitarian aid, but it's very often missed, which is psychosocial support, and this is very important for us. And for the next slide. So I was very intrigued to be invited to this seminar, as we usually do not use volunteers outside of the country. I mean, we never do this. Nevertheless, we do have volunteering, but this volunteering is only being done in our country, in Poland. So we never engage volunteers to leave the country, because we we feel that we can only send our permanently employed and well-trained humanitarian workers, so local or expats, to the field. So we need to check the psychological state of the person. We need to check the health issues. We need to give all the vaccines. We need to train the person in safety, and the most important, this person usually serves a very specific role, for example, finance or HR or communication or engineering. So it's not also very easy to find volunteers like this. So for these two reasons, safety and the purpose of going for the international mission, we do not use volunteers to go outside of the Polish border. Nevertheless, we are cooperating with many volunteers in Poland, but up until the October 2021, we only used volunteers in the offices. So for the events, translations, office works, organizing, coordinating some projects, but in Poland. But that all changed in October 2021 when we had to switch to rapid humanitarian assistance on our own ground. That didn't happen before. So first, the Polish-Belarusian border with the refugee and migration crisis there. If you're not familiar with the crisis, it was a situation, and still going on, where some of the individuals, a lot of them actually, were caught between two of the borders, Poland and Belarus, and were not able to pass to any of them, basically, and were a subject of being kicked off, of being pushed, when we say pushed back to the Belarus, and then back to Poland, and back, and many people spent a lot of time in the forest. And there was no easy way to access them, as the government decided to isolate 3-kilometer stripe by the Belarusian border, and didn't allow us as humanitarian organizations to enter. Didn't allow either the lawyers or anybody else. So it was a very difficult moment when we really needed the help of volunteers to stay by the border of the 3-kilometer stripe to provide rapid humanitarian assistance to those individuals that pass this exclusion zone and need food, shelter, water, medicines. Also, right now, as we are in Polish, in Ukrainian crisis caused by war, we also have, we are using the volunteers. Can I switch to the next slide? So in Ukrainian crisis, we are using the help of volunteers in 3 different spheres. So one is the border. So it's a rapid humanitarian aid. It's provision of very basic products like food, water, warm blankets, because in Poland in this time, it was, the temperature was -10, -12 Celsius. Right now it's better, but still warm soups and drinks and warmers are needed during night. The volunteers are also providing translations and information, helping other services like border guards and police and firefighters to communicate and to move people from the border to the reception centers. And we are also helping in reception centers. Second thing is warehouse, so the whole logistics, the preparation of the transports of the smaller humanitarian convoys on the other side of the border, as well as documentation and needs assessment for the for providing more products. And that's it. And then in office, we are still employing and engaging the volunteers in translation information and the work of secretariat, but also right now in more complicated issues such as HR, logistics, assistance to the member of the board. And we are using the idea of help when you can. So not only you don't have to provide us a whole week of help, but you can help when you can. Whereas at the border, you should spend at least 4 days. Andrea is my last minute here. Right. So yeah, so cooperation in crisis, we are trying to cooperate as much as we can with local governments, as I said, and smaller NGOs. So right now in Poland, we are cooperating inside of the NGO forum. We are also cooperating with companies that are providing us as well volunteers for the company volunteering for a day to free in Warsaw or somewhere else, as well as cooperating with private volunteers and providing them with the special transport card that they can use to buy fuel with, and they can provide the aid to Ukraine by themselves. And the next slide. So the lessons learned very quickly, we did discover that volunteers can be used in rapid humanitarian aid, but within Polish borders. In crisis management, such as this crisis. These volunteers should have, nevertheless, training, accommodation, meals, and whole psychological support that is very important if you're a volunteer in crisis, and the feedback after duties, which is also very important for the volunteers. The volunteers that are long-term, so for 1 week, 1 month, 2 months, and also those who come back after sometimes are the goal, the most important and valuable volunteers, and we should really count on them. And also the volunteers can be employed and trained, so become even not permanent employees of the organization to perform some more complicated duties, such as cross-border transport in our case, or some logistics. So thank you very much, and you can always email me, and let's start the discussion.
Thank you very much, Helena. And can I welcome back the other speakers? If you could all turn your videos back on, and we will. We'd like to see your faces when we ask you some insightful questions. Thank you to those of you who have been posting the questions into the Q&A. Some of them have been answered in text form by Alice, just to make sure that we get round to them. I'm going to take the moderator's privilege and combine some of the questions that you've posted for all the speakers to respond to. And I'm going to start with the one about preparing volunteers, or in humanitarian emergency terms, maybe pre-positioning volunteers and volunteers as resources to prepare for and respond to future emergencies. How can you do that? And I'm going to combine that with 3 other questions. They are, how do you choose the partners to work with when you're doing that, when you're preparing volunteers for the future? And how do you plan with those partners, and especially the local communities? And I'm going to combine that with the last question from Savita Kulkarni, which is, how do you monitor your progress? So it's preparing for future emergencies. Who do you work with to prepare, including the local communities? And how do you monitor progress? What indicators do you use, or can you use? I can see that, Kuule, you have a great deal of experience on this. And if we could start with you, and then we'll go to Alice, Shrirang, and then Helena. Kuule. How can we pre-position volunteers for future emergencies? You're still on mute.
Yes, I have picked one question here. Someone was asking for how long would our volunteers stay active. Most of our volunteers have always stayed active because they are motivated because of our capacity we give to them. If you look at the refresher trainings we keep giving them, this keeps them into the motives of working, and in that way they keep on working, and this is giving some reports, because we monitor them through the reports they give in their work and what they are doing. So that's the question I have seen here. So we normally monitor them by that.
Okay, well, Kuule used the speaker's privilege and chose which question to answer. If I could bring you guys, Alice, back to you. If I could bring you guys back to the ones that I was asking, which is about the pre-positioning of volunteers and the partners and monitoring your progress.
Is it to me? Okay, thank you. So disaster time is not the time to start preparing disasters or preparing for volunteers for disasters. We choose the organizations that we want to deploy with, and we choose our employees and have them train with those organizations well in advance so that they know those partners, they understand the logistics that they're getting into, and they understand what their job is going to be during times of disasters. So the organizations that we work with for those volunteers are organizations that we have existing programs with. And part of the training, when we go out and we train these people, is to have them, teach them how to report back to us. What is going on in the disaster field? What did UPS do directly to make an impact? And what did the team do to make an impact? So the monitoring progress, the indicators, that is all part of the training, which is done well in advance of the disaster.
Great, Shrirang, what about you? How do you choose the partners to work with, and then and include local communities, and then how do you what metrics do you use to monitor progress?
Okay, so how do we choose partners? There are few peacetime partners, right? There are some agencies which understand the child care, for example, better than others. There are some agencies which understand the old age care much better than others. So there are peacetime partners basis their strength, their experience. That's one. Second is, not all these agencies may operate in areas where the disaster has happened. So the option is whether to import them there or figure out which is the best suitable agency in that geography where we should get going. So that's one. Second one is that for certain activities, say for example, if we are running community kitchens, it's much better that we take local cooks and local partners, because they understand the culture specificity of the cuisine that population consumes. So it's much better to have local partners there in cases. So that's another option. The third one that was asked about monitoring progress. In disasters, you have rescue phase, the relief phase, and rehab phase. Rescue and relief is when a lot of volunteers go in. The rehab phase is a long 3-5 years journey for recovery of the hardware, which is your housing and so on, and recovery of software as well. So for rehab phase, we have social development professionals finding out what exactly that we are going to do, and depending on the thrust area. So if it's a livelihood, we will ask the question how much income increase that has happened because of our livelihood intervention. So those are monitoring and evaluation strict, by following the MND science, so to say. But in rescue and relief, it's much at the informal level. Try and figure out if communities are going without food, can we give them healthy food? So the indicators are retuned in a way where common minimum quality is assured and we deliver the response efficiently. Remember, in disasters, every second that we lose, we may lose lives, and it may cost us much more. So efficiency is important, and hence we do not get in an elaborate M&D framework in relief phase, but in rehab phase we have an elaborate framework.
And Helena, maybe I could focus the other part of this with you. Let's look at the question of how. How do you work with partners in preparing volunteers for their work? And And one of them that came up as well, this one's from Monica, is how do you deal with or support the mental health of volunteers in disaster situations? And this is a very critical issue considering the severity of some of the experiences the volunteers are going through.
Right, especially in the crisis management, you have to take into account that both the humanitarians and the volunteers performing humanitarian work, they are prone to burnout. They are prone to basically even if during the performing their duties they do not feel that much the burden of the work, they will feel it afterwards. And preventing that burnout is very crucial into having them come back or staying for a long time or engaging in the future in volunteering, because it's very easy to let somebody burn out and very difficult to provide them favorable conditions to thrive as volunteers. So for us, and I am mentioning this, that it's very new to us to have volunteers in crisis management, but from our gathered experience from October till now, we can say that the very crucial thing is to explain very clearly what are the duties, then choose very wisely the coordinators, explain to them the duties of taking care of the volunteers and their mental health and well-being, also providing the proper accommodation close to the place they're working in, nutritious meals, time to sleep, to really allocate the shifts that they're doing properly. So if somebody is working during the day, cannot do the night shift all the time, like for 2 weeks, this is exhausting. The other thing is to have always on call a psychologist. So we do have psychologists on call or on the border, but usually on call that are available for the coordinators and for us. The other thing is to really tell the coordinators to watch out for the signs of burnout and tell them what the signs are. And also to explain to the volunteers that there is no shame in going back home, no shame in going to sleep earlier than your shift, and no shame in even resigning for a longer time, because we don't need people as a one-use volunteer. We need them to feel well, to not lose their enthusiasm and will to help. So really, this is the basics that we saw and we experienced. And the other part of the question about the cooperation with other entities. So actually, we are cooperating with some other NGOs, and with local governments to not double our work. So, for example, if we are to provide translators on the borders, then we need to check if the local government isn't providing them already. If we are providing help on somewhere in some refugee reception center, we need to make sure that other organization isn't already covering that. So there is a lot of talking and coordination and cooperation with other NGOs and local governments. And last but not least, the companies that I mentioned, the volunteering in companies, that is becoming a very popular thing here in Central Europe, to let your employees to do 1 day, 1 week, a couple of days of volunteering per month, a year, is very different in every company. That allows a large group of people to be volunteers at the same time. For example, our maximum was 70 people that were allocated to us, that we are able to divide to many different reception centers and border and office in Warsaw at the same time. Not the good part of this is that usually it's only for a couple of days. You have no time to train the people. Still, you have to provide everything for them. And it's a bit of a lost opportunity in having a long-term volunteer. The plus part is maybe the company will be eager to let them go the second time if they are very enthusiastic about the volunteers that volunteer, or maybe they will be able to come back in their own free time, for example, for a week or for 2 weeks. So there are always pros and cons with the volunteering from companies. I'm sorry if I took too much time, but.
No, it's very good. I'm going to ask now, again, I'm going to prepare you with one question and then ask you a question for you to answer immediately. So the question to think about, and I'll ask you to close with your answer on this, is related to the people that we have on this call right now. We have people from around the world with a great deal of experience in non-profit organizations and working in companies, and some with government experience as well. If you have one question to ask them as speakers that would help you, what kind of question would you ask them? What support would you ask for that you would want to walk away from this session with? So if you could just think about that, and I'll come back to you at the end and ask for your answer. Before that, I'm going to ask you a question for you to answer immediately, which is from Innocent Effiong, who asks, how can we raise volunteers that can build strong global force in organizing the before and after?
I did not get the full question.
I think we lost him. Jessica, if, okay, he's back.
Okay, Kuule, I'll repeat the question, Kuule. If you could take yourself off of mute. The question is, how can we raise new disaster management volunteers that can build a global strong force in organizing before and after disasters?
Oh, thank you. This is a very great question, especially when it comes to mobilizing. You know, Andy, it is all about understanding the community where you're coming from. That is the first step one needs to understand. And two, different communities have different ideologies of understanding and preparing for the disaster. At first, when you need to create a very strong volunteer team, management team, come up with an innovation that brings all leaders together. Because when you bring local leaders together, they are able to mobilize for you good volunteers. And when you have got the volunteers themselves, make sure you give them adequate trainings, as I have always said, because there are very many volunteers who doesn't know what to do at what particular time. When should I opt to do this? So have they mobilize through the volunteers using the local community platforms, and then you come up with the trainings themselves. Build the capacity. Every time be with them. Join them in the understanding of disaster. And after their understanding and joining them frequently, because this will also have one, making strategies of putting together the coordinators in different areas where they come from. These coordinators will always give feedback to where you are. And once you have the feedback, you are able to keep them at normal. For us in Africa, our volunteering is different. I will bring a perspective of Africa itself. We don't think of bringing volunteers from far distances because this is much expensive for us. So if you need to create a strong volunteering management team of disaster preparedness, make sure you select the volunteers in their respective places where they come from. This will reduce, one, the cost of travels, the cost of meals, the cost of medication, the cost and overcharging for their time they offer at their different time. Two, it even becomes easier for someone to volunteer when he's free. When he has a free time, he offers 2 to 3 hours in time. And this helps so much. So in Africa, we'll talk in our perspective. It is all about the resources vis-a-vis the
Okay, I think we'll have to move on to the next speaker. Thank you very much, Kuule. I think we got the general gist of what you were trying to say there. Shrirang, will you have a go at answering Innocent's question about how we raise disaster management volunteers to build a strong global force?
Yeah. So one is what Helena said. Don't encourage disaster tourism. I'm sorry to use this expression. Don't encourage. At the group, we are very strict. All the other kinds of volunteering, we are fine when people go with their incentive to self-transform themselves, etc. In disaster time, we are very clear. We are here to serve the community. So that's paramount for us. And if that has to happen, you need to get trained. Second is, don't start working when disaster strikes. A lot of peacetime platforms like this, thanks to Laurie and colleagues at IAWE, will help. Tomorrow, if I want to do something in Poland, I'm going to talk to Helena. There's no, so peacetime partnerships, peacetime friendships certainly help. Try and map out relevant skills that are required. We are fairly, this lockdown stumped us all, but we know exactly what goes in disaster response. So in peacetime, map out the set of skills, set of partners that you would like to work with, and that always comes handy. I think these three mantras should suffice for us for an effective response.
Okay, you mentioned Helena. Helena, would you like to elaborate on the idea of building a strong global force of volunteers?
Well, as I said, we are not using volunteers in our aid further than our borders, and we are not planning to do so because we are obliged by our rules not to do so. But for those who would like to create such global volunteering force, I would say that definitely preventing, as Shrirang said, preventing the volunteerism, preventing the using the volunteers in the works that are not adjusted to them, that are too much for them in the unstable conditions. Also working with organizations or companies that are not taking into account the general rules of humanitarian work and dignified treatment of the people in need. So and of course of the sustainability of the ecosystem. So definitely you should check very well your partners and companies you partner with. Check very well the preparedness of your own volunteers and of your own organization, the ability of your own organization to command volunteers, because from our perspective it's a very difficult job to command hundreds of volunteers at the same time that were not volunteers before and will not be volunteers after, and they are working all from the purity of their heart and from goodwill, that usually in a very emotional state and often unprepared for what is awaiting them. So this is some general points. But as I said, I think that Alice or Kuule or Shrirang have better experience with volunteering in this international sense.
And I know that Alice has a great deal of international experience as well. And maybe you could close off on this topic, Alice, and then make your call to action.
Absolutely. So I mean, I agree with everything the rest of the panel has said. In order to grow a global volunteer force, you have to train ahead of time. You have to train locally. You have to have those people in place who can lead a group of volunteers. Localization is the best response during a disaster. They know the ins and outs of the country. here in the US, we work with American Red Cross, and we have UPS drivers help the American Red Cross drivers because they know how to get around the broken bridge. They know how to, maneuver in the different areas. And internationally, if it's in the Philippines, we work with PDRF doing the same thing. If it's in Europe, we're working with Coyote to do the same thing. So we have those partners, those local partners set up ahead of time, train with those partners ahead of time, and everybody in your region, district, country, whatever it is, should know who that volunteer contact is ahead of time, who's going to lead the charge to respond to that disaster.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Alice. And your call to action?
Well, my call to action is really to work with organizations like yours, collaborate, right? There is nothing wrong with collaborating with a competitor during times of disaster. When you have the same, you have the same product, you have the same expertise, you have the same something to offer that disaster, work with your competitors, work with the organizations that are like you, because together you go further. Together you're going to make a better impact. During times of disasters, it's not who puts out the press release first or who puts out the bigger number on the press release. It's really working together to get the job done and to save lives.
And I know you're walking the talk as well. Your partnership with the logistics emergency teams with the other supply chain companies is a fantastic example. So we have 10 seconds each from the rest of you for your call to action. We'll do it in reverse order. Maybe Helena and then Shrirang.
Still, I have a question to answer.
I'm not sure we've got time.
From Samina. Okay. So I just wanted to say to Samina Bokari, that you can also have long-term volunteers, such as, for example, legal volunteers that are working in legal companies that are providing aid for free during a long-term time. So long-term. So this is it. And my call to action would be, as I already said, really see well what are your abilities as organization. Don't take more than you can, because you may hurt somebody on the way of helping. So don't take more that you can already process within your organization, but always try to develop with the help of other organizations.
Thank you, Helena. Shrirang?
So good intentions are essential but not sufficient. Figure out what are the milestones towards what is essential and walk the path.
Great. And Kuule, last word to you.
Yes, always create an environment where you need to learn more, explore more on what other people are doing, and then be able to bring it back to your real world, to your real understanding. And this will be helping to also engage with the different partners, government, and different community stakeholders. Will get back to you when you have learned more. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much, Kuule. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Shrirang. Thank you, Helena. Great examples, and it's been a real pleasure sitting on the panel with you and taking the questions. We haven't got around to all of them. There's always more questions, but the action is what matters. Thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.